Good day to you. This is Anagalactic on the 19th day of June in 2026. We are in a series covering the family of curves. There are 4 named curves in the family of curves. You'll see all 4 of them there, and one of them is the most famous curve of all, the straight curve. It's a line of zero curvature, which in this diagram is depicted at the bottom, and my little pointer here, I believe, is designating the straight line. It does not show a value of 0, though, which would be curvature. That is a lazy 8. This is eccentricity is the right word for that value of infinity for the straight line. Well, you might ask, what is the lower range of this, and what are these numbers intending to convey? It's best in geometry to actually see what's being said, and then you can find out or even figure out the mathematical formula for how these numbers are acquired. The bottom line, the straight line, is a unique line. There's only one line in the family of curves that is straight. And then reading up, you'll see a blue line, which represents the family of hyperbole. The hyperbole actually exist on the plane in between the straight line going up and the boundary, the upper bound of the family of hyperbole is another unique line called the parabola. In the metric called eccentricity, it's a value of 1, which, as you know, is a magic number. That's quite profound that the parabola in this formula for the eccentricity of a line has the unique value of 1. There is no family for parabolae. Then continuing on up, we reach the 4th of the named lines. You'll see it's quite special. It is an ellipse. This particular ellipse has a eccentricity value of 1/2, which can be read as 1/2. We are seeing a progression going up of a decreasing value in eccentricity. It is important to observe that this is a continuous projection. That is, this is intended to designate the entire plane above the line. Now, just so you know what's below the line, there is the reflection of the hyperbola, which you can see is not symmetric around the horizontal straight line, and there's a reason for that which we won't go into at this time, because what I wanted to show you was simply the family of curves that we covered in the last 2 videos. The eccentricity value is quite profound. And just to sum it up, if you haven't had time to go back and see those 2 videos, or you didn't see them when they were produced, the range of eccentricity, of course, has an upper bound which can't be any more than infinity. So it does go all the way to infinity, inclusive. A zero curvature line has an eccentricity of infinity. And there is a strict mathematical reason for designating that as infinity. But that does raise a question. Infinity is not a number in the sense of the rest of the numbers. And just to complete this continuous series, this is a geometric series. So the straight line essentially is bent upwards, and this is done on a strict formula which Kepler and Newton and Bošković all used, and you can look this up at your leisure or watch the prior videos if you wish. But what I want you to see is, as you go up, the eccentricity goes down, and this particular hyperbola in blue has an eccentricity of 2, which, just to make things simple here, really should be written 2/1, because this is a plane. And every line on a plane has 2 values, not 1. In other words, it's not a single component number. And you'll see that because once we get to e = 1, you could also write that as 1/1, but it's optional in the way we're taught in school how to write those numbers. That from 1 to infinity, those are obviously single component numbers. But is that so obvious? Actually, eccentricity of 1 is written incorrectly, and Wikipedia is guilty of a hideous error. But that's to be forgiven because Wikipedia is not aware of the discovery that I made, essentially from studying the work of Bošković. But I figured this out on my own without having realized that Bošković had already dealt with this. Bošković was quite a prolific author who lived in the 1700s, right after the demise of Leibniz and Newton, which was about a century after Kepler. And this family of curves had already been studied in antiquity. Several known Greek geometers studied this family of curves. These are essentially 2D projections of conic sections. Now, without going into that, which is a whole world of study in itself, you can see that this is a fantastically simple diagram. It shows every line that can be drawn on a plane. And that's redundant because all lines are drawn on a plane. And if anyone tells you that you can draw a line on a sphere, they are mixing up terms and they'll end up confusing you and leading you to a dead end. So what I will show you is the correct approach to what is called a line, which you know is often confounded with a straight line. But the straight line is simply one kind of line, and actually it's a unique line. It's a line which has zero curvature, but in this metric has eccentricity of infinity, which is not a quantity. And we're going to be exploring that because this is the correct way to approach infinity, in every sense of infinity. This is the right way to understand what infinity is. And I want to just alert you and emphasize there is no other way to understand infinity. You'll never understand infinity unless you approach infinity the way I'm about to show you. And this also is quite productive. Once you do know how infinity is correctly defined, you will understand every other form of infinity, no matter what. And it's quite a list. Infinity is the subject of some of the most either harebrained or profound observations, going all the way to just pure religion on the daffy side. And if anybody has genuine insight into the transcendental value in some sense of consciousness or reality of what is infinity, I can assure you they're full of shit. Absolutely full of shit. Nobody can possibly define infinity until you define it the only way that it can be defined. And that is what I'm about to show you. So this is the family of curves. And just to complete our sequence of 4, so you'll see the numeric value of infinity so that I'll be able to show you how you can actually see infinity. And this will impart to you supervision, which may put me in the class of macadamia nuts or Brazil nuts or whatever kind of tomfoolery would come from a tomfool. That's the nominative there. So we have eccentricity infinity and then a continuous series of numeric values that transcends the real numbers. The real numbers are actually the unreal numbers. Norman John Wildberger would agree with me. It has been proved by none other than Conway that the straight line is infinitely dense with irrational numbers. But irrational numbers are not numbers. And I'll be showing you that. Because they're not quantities. That has been argued violently. And what I just told you would be considered to be the attitude or posture of an absolute dunce cap. Quite the contrary is the case. So infinity is written incorrectly for the same reason that this hyperbola having an eccentricity of 2 is written incorrectly. The parabola, which is unique, has an eccentricity of 1, and that is written incorrectly. But this ellipse up here, which is a specific ellipse in the family, Everything above the green line is the family of ellipses. You can probably see that intuitively. I'm sure you can. But you can see how profound is this diagram. So the eccentricity of this particular ellipse is written correctly because it's in two-component form. It's written as a fraction, and that is the way we notate a two-component number, which has a much different characteristic than a linear number. And 1 over 2 is not a linear number. And you have to learn that no matter what your mathematicians say. They all will disagree with me, and all of them are wrong. So these numbers should be written in two-component form because what is being depicted is the family of curves, of which the straight line is a boundary condition, as is the parabola. The parabola separates the family of ellipses from the family of hyperbole. And those are the only two families of lines in the universe. There is no other kind of line except an ellipse and a hyperbola. And the two special cases, which are boundary conditions, which is the zero curvature line and the parabola, which you might ask, well, then what is the curvature of the parabola? That's a very good homework exercise for you. I won't divulge it right here. The eccentricity of the parabola being 1 is written incorrectly because it's in linear form. And this has nothing to do with linear form. This has to do with planar form. These are planar figures. They're not linear figures. They're planar figures, which means in our argot that we were taught in school is that they're two-dimensional objects. And when you say 2 dimensions, what you're saying is 2 linear numbers, 2 one-component numbers. But on a plane, there's no such thing. There is, however, such a thing on this curve. The one that has zero curvature has linear values because it's been straightened out so that it no longer has a vertical aspect. But the other 3 lines are curved. And all the lines in the universe are curved. All of them are. Except you could say this derivative line. And it is a derivative, as I've proved. And I'll be showing you that as well. It is the calculus derivative of this space. And that's the geometric definition of the calculus, which is the only correct definition of the calculus. Newton defined it incorrectly, so did Leibniz, and so has everyone ever since. It works because linear computation is the derivative form of computation. I'll be showing you how the universe actually does its computations, which is never with linear numbers. It's always with at least 2 component numbers. From our perspective as humans, we're forced to make these statements, which actually every single statement that I just made from the beginning of this video presentation could be challenged and partially successfully. So you have to take everything that someone says in this context in which I'm speaking, challenging the entire edifice of mathematics, challenging everything that we actually know about numbers. You've got to realize that I'm at least half full of crocky, right? But it's important to realize that so are the other mathematicians. They're half wrong. And I got the other half. But the other half pulls together both halves into a consistent whole, which I would tend to want to call integral space. But integral space here is planar. It's not volume space, which has an extra dimension. We say that's an extra linear dimension. When you say 3D, you're adding the third linear dimension to linearized planar space. And that's a mistake, which I've rigorously proved by going back to what Euclid did and finding out what he did wrong, which he absolutely did do it wrong. But it's so peculiar to say that because I'm half wrong in saying that, because obviously it works. That is, the linear number system, which is based on that zero curvature line, works quite well, and our computers all run on linear numbers. That is, one component numbers. But these numbers are two component numbers, and I'll show you why that's so significant. The e equals 1. You could equally say that that's a stupid mistake, which is absolutely correct, but not absolutely. Or you could say that that's the only way to write it, and anybody who wrote it any differently would be a dunce cap. That's also correct and incorrect. And that is called superpositional logic. And that was discovered in the 20th century at the quantum level. And superpositional logic is something that needs to be explored in the way that I've explored it, because it has vast implications that go well beyond mathematics. And you'll be seeing part of that new picture that changes science forever. So we have eccentricity, a very simple concept. You can look this up in Wikipedia to see how this was done. It's well known, very well known. But this is written incorrectly, and Wikipedia is superpositionally correct and superpositionally absolutely incorrect. So the correct way to write these numbers is, first of all, to realize that this red ellipse, which has a value of 1 proportion to, don't say 1 over 2. That's what a monkey would say. It's 1 proportion to, which has a very specific relationship between the numerator and denominator. Would you say that that's division? You could say so, because in the linear computational system, that's what we call it. But that's not what it is. It's not division. Nature doesn't divide things. What nature does is proportionalize quantities, and that's what this eccentricity value designates, is a proportionality between the vertical component and the horizontal component. And that has to be the case because the components of a two-component number must be linear. So linear numbers are embedded in the space that I discovered. I discovered a new space, and that's going to lead us into the space called imaginary space. And the way we're going to get to that is to come back towards this infinity and rewrite it. So eccentricity of 1 proportion to describes a closed line. That's quite fantastically important to notice that there's closure. And really, you could say, as has been said, that that is no longer a line, because it doesn't open up to 2 infinities. The other 3 lines in the family of curves open up to 2 infinities. The straight line, of course, goes to plus and minus infinity. The hyperbola goes to 2 infinities, which in this case, you would have to say is left and right. Is it plus and minus? That's been debated for centuries. I'll show you how to close that debate, so you will know, and no one else will. Does the parabola go to 2 infinities? It certainly does. But if you go 1 infinitesimal in the metric past the parabola, it snaps to closure, and that's called the quantum jump. And that actually leads to the solution of the collapse of the wave function, as I'll be showing you. So this solves the most important question in physics, according to Paul-Adrien Maurice Dirac, who to his dying day, and he never solved this, and he admitted he never solved it, but he said, if anybody can solve the collapse of the wave function such that it doesn't violate relativity and it doesn't end up in a probabilistic equation, then you have the secret, the key to physics. You will know everything. Well, we'll have to prove that, but that is essentially the case, as I now know. So the ellipse here, this red ellipse, is part of a family of ellipses. And its value here is 1 over 2. What's the range? Well, you could see the upper range. The upper range is 1 over 1. And it can't get to 1 over 1 because then it would change from being an ellipse to being the parabola. So it's like the straight line in curved space. That's the parabola. That also describes the trajectory without taking into account air resistance, wind speed, and certain geodetic features. It's the exact trajectory for launching a missile. Actually, launching something from a catapult to brain your enemy, to just kill the body of your enemy. You would want to launch that rock on a parabolic trajectory, because it's a perfect trajectory for murder. So this has immense value for the race of humanoids, the ape people that you were taught that's what you are. Well, anybody who would launch a rock onto someone else's head obviously isn't human. So Darwin does have a point. However, Darwin was full of shit. Now, the eccentricity of that ellipse is 1/2. Is there an ellipse with an eccentricity of 1/4? Yes. 1/8? Yes. 1/infinity? Yes. That is correct. And you just discovered the secret of this planar number system. That when you rewrite the numbers as two-component numbers, you now have the correct number system, not just for the straight line, which only uses one-component numbers. Right? What is the eccentricity of this straight line? Does it have a one-component value? It does not have a one-component value. It has a two-component value. So let's trace this back. This is the reverse of Zeno's paradox, which I solved for the first time since Zeno. Zeno actually formulated 4 versions of his paradox. But every schoolboy knows at least one of Zeno's paradoxes, which the mathematicians have never been able to solve. I solved it. So here is what is meant by Zeno's paradox. If you're proceeding through all the numbers, and these are all the numbers, including the linear numbers, are embedded in this space, which I proved in 2022, so you can take that to the bank. All the linear numbers are embedded in two-component planar space. That's extremely profound. So remember that I said that. As I demonstrate to you now, what is the proper rationalization of infinity? For the first time in human history, I have the definition of infinity. And let me remind you, emphatically, this is the only possible definition for infinity. And you'll see that this is so simple. This is such a simple diagram that it's unbelievable. It's supernatural. It's a gift. And I'm giving a gift to humanity. This gift will not be accepted. That's okay. I still get my reward. And I'll talk about that in a little while. The ellipse has a value in two-component number space of 1/2. That one does. But what's the range of possible ellipses? All the way up to 1 non-inclusive. How far down? So what is the highest value for an ellipse? Well, as you approach 1, the number on the bottom, called the denominator, as you know, gets closer and closer to 1, so you're converging on 1. But if you reach 1/1, it snaps to a parabola. It snaps when the denominator matches the numerator, and you have 1/1. The description of that curve on the eccentricity metric is 1/1. It is no longer an ellipse. But if it's a number, a quantum value higher than 1, what would be the quantum value higher than 1? Well, you'd have to determine what is the Planck unit. But you still can describe the range of numbers. Without being specific, you can still describe the range of numbers that describes the entire family of ellipses, which, as you know, has a very special case called a circle. A circle. Yes. An object that has never been understood in the history of man, and therefore neither has been the sphere. If there were such understanding, we would have a spherical geometry. There is no such thing. Oh, there is now. I discovered it. So that's what you're getting, is spherical geometry for the universe and circular geometry for the plane, both of which are 100% unknown to mathematics, and your physicists don't know it either, and that's why they have a quantum paradox. I solved the collapse of the wave function, don't forget that. Also, they're looking for the quantum of gravity without realizing that it's already been discovered. So your scientific cartel, composed exclusively of mathematicians now, is psychotic. And they're also retarded. And they're also apes. They haven't evolved. And now they can't. And so they've doomed humanity to its fiery fate. So this goes all the way to religion, beyond religion. It goes all the way to the source of all supernaturality. And I'm going to be showing you supernaturality because it exists in infinite space, which I discovered. Don't forget that. So all of this ties together in a way which is so overwhelming that it is not possible for you to ever understand this. I hope I just lied to you, but given what I know, it's almost a dead certainty that this is beyond your comprehension. It certainly is beyond the comprehension of any mathematician, especially a mathematician with a PhD. If you know anyone, or I'm sure you've heard some on YouTube, anybody with a PhD in mathematics is doomed. Never will understand anything. It's the definition of being perfectly retarded. And I could use some much more filthy, dirty words, which I'm not alone, by the way, in that. I could cite a man whom I just contacted recently, and I won't name him because it could start a war, but he's got to be one of the most stuffed shirt people I've ever heard of. The reason I consulted him is because he's probably on the better track than any of the other mathematicians. But he's still just as stupid as the rest of them. The answers that we need from science, including from mathematics and from physics and from astronomers and from cosmologists, are human answers to human questions. If it doesn't help you solve your question of how to live and how to die, it's absolutely worthless. And you can take it from me, because I actually know. And I can prove everything I say. Nobody else can prove anything that they say. In that sense, in that context. Remember, all of this is superpositional. And I discovered what Paul Dirac meant by superpositionality. And so did David Bohm, and it took him outside the realm of science and into the lap of the Dalai Lama, who called David Bohm his guru. And it also took him into very close concourse with Jeppu Krishnamurti. And I could go on about the intensity of the discoveries made by David Bohm, who's the only man worthy of being called a quantum mechanist, because David Bohm is the only man in the history of quantum mechanics who ever got a rational answer out of that system. But it took him right out of mathematics. It took him right out of science. It took him into religion. He didn't quite make it, but I'm not that kind of a judge. I don't predict whether a man is going to hell or going to heaven, because no man actually knows that. But there is where you can start using some probabilities. For instance, anybody who believes in natural selection evolution, such as there's such a thing as speciation of humans, that person is going to hell. Definitely. because they want to. They made the decision that they want to go to hell. They don't want to live after death. It gets more intense than that. You have men like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, and there's actually 4 of them called the 4 Horsemen of the New Atheism Apocalypse. Unbelievable shit. Unbelievable shit. But anybody who says they're an atheist, never speak with that human being ever again. Because what Muhammad said is justified in the eyes of Yeshua. Both of those men are prophets. Muhammad said, under the auspices of Yeshua, don't forget they're both prophets, once an atheist, always an atheist. Richard Dawkins made a pact with Satan. He lost his soul. And if you listen to that monster, you're going to hell with him unless you can break out of the trap which no man has ever broken out of. You either turn to your Creator and as an Islam man does, or you're going to hell. No in between. So that's the nature of the family of curves as we approach infinity, which I alone can define. And that will lead us into a religious discourse which you not only will not understand, you won't even hear. So I'm sending you away. Thank you for listening. I hope you don't go away, but 100 out of 100 of you will, because there are no exceptions. It's too late. Probation is closed. I learned that phraseology from a cult called the SDA cult, the Seventh-day Adventists, with whom I matriculated for about 15 years and became an overseas missionary to Ukraine. I went to Kiev 5 times. I lived there. I married their princess. I lived there illegally, and I was detained by authorities there on both sides of the Atlantic, and I survived it. So you're not talking with an ordinary man. In fact, you're not talking with me at all. I've wanted to go to live stream, but I am so poor that I can't even afford a broadband connection. And I haven't had a decent haircut. That is, I've had to cut my own hair for 2 years. Otherwise, I don't have enough food. Okay, thank you for tuning in. I'm not like the others. You've never heard anyone talk the way I talk. It gets worse. I'm going to talk to you about Revelation, about the Quran, and about the source of all prophecy, and it all has to do with infinity in some way that I can't yet define. Okay, thank you for your patience. I always allot myself a time for ranting because I am dying. I don't look it, but I'm over 70 years old, and I don't have long to live. My wife died 16 years ago. That's why I took up astrophysics, which demands, if you want to actually know astrophysics, you have to turn to quantum mechanics. Why? Because the only information we get from the universe is from light. Did you know that? It's only from light. How does gravity figure in there? It's the only other source of information of anything beyond the solar system. It comes from light. What is the nature of light? The quantum paradox, which I solved. So let there be light. Yehior. We'll be right back. Maybe a little later today. I doubt it. I am so far beyond this stuff now. It's just actually starting to become a little bit tiresome. It wouldn't be tiresome if someone like Kurt Mungle got me on his show. But instead, he only has Norman Wildberger, and that's probably a better choice. I think you can tell why. Norman is a lot more stable than I am. I don't need to be stable. I'm beyond all levels of mathematicians, all levels of physicists, and all levels of religionists, except I just discovered Islam last year. And I'm almost done reading the Quran. I've read a lot by Al-Ghazali. I actually have a teacher who is an accreditable imam, and I now claim to be beyond all the imams in my ability to explain both Islam and the part of religion that Islam doesn't seem to quite get yet for excellent protective reasons. They're fine. It's just they don't know what they might know. As for the Christians, whom I've been trying to work with all my life, essentially, they're beyond hope. None of them actually believe in what they preach. None of the 1,000 Protestant sects actually believe what they say, because they're liars. Because every last one of them, with the exception of just a few sects that are actually wacky, but they're all wacky because they all say that Jesus is God. And if you continue to say that, I'm telling you straight from the top, you're going to hell. That all of you are. I don't care if it's 200 million of you. You say that Jesus is God, you will never change your mind. And that means you're going to burn in hell forever. Who said that? Muhammad did. Who else said that? Yeah, the one that you lie about. You filthy, dirty European swine. Good luck in trying to attack Iran. You're not going to get away with it, and you're not going to conquer Russia either. You filthy, dirty Christians! Turn to Islam or die! Thank you very much. I hope you realize I'm very close to death. But I will never stop telling the truth. And I'm the last man who does. Keep looking up. This evening will be a crescent moon. One of the most beautiful sights that you'll ever see. And it converts every single child to the way of heaven until their goddamned parents and society get hold of them and beat it out of them. Pity the children. You're all child molesters. Every Protestant minister, as are your mathematicians. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be right back. Thank you.